the nickel minerals, they are carbon absorbed. So they actually absorb carbon dioxide once they're fresh dug out of the ground.
Talking nickel here today with Flying Nickel and John. Carbon neutrality, a big topic, especially along the supply chain. What's the state of affairs currently in the nickel market?
Well, nickel market is just like every other market. Just like aviation industry, the mining industry sooner or later is going to be tracked on how much carbon is being consumed to produce a unit of nickel. And that's why it's very important to understand the origin of a nickel operation, where the nickel is mined and the methods of which the nickel is extracted, particularly given if the nickel is going into the electric vehicle space.
Yeah, and I mean, for those that think this is just a fad or just a trend, there are quite a few lawsuits happening on the oil majors, but also on the mining majors, from investors who are insisting on forcing these companies through their shareholder rights on voting to be more on the ESG side of things and to speed up their process of becoming carbon neutral. So it's actually quite a big topic when big pension funds are stepping in and are putting on pressure to accelerate the path towards decarbonization.
Well, there are many companies, big and small, different industries. Even the oil industry is trying to be carbon neutral by 2030. And so I think the government is adopting the carrot and the stick approach. So the carrot is there's incentives and grants for you to transition into the green energy space. And the stick is that if you exceed certain carbon limits, you have to buy carbon credits. And these are increasingly getting very expensive.
Yeah, and I think we've just started with the EVs as a quick fix, but obviously just moving the point of combustion from one part of the supply chain to another part doesn't really fix the problem. So consumers are also becoming more aware of that. Just because the car doesn't have emissions right where you're driving, it does have emissions along the supply chain with the materials that actually went into the vehicle.
Certainly, the power needs to be stored in the batteries, and the method in which the power is produced is what matters. If you burn coal to produce power, you could be surprised that your energy per carbon consumption could be greater than burning fossil fuel.
That's exactly right. Of course, the fuel matters a lot, but also what matters is how you source those materials. And of course, we're talking about the Minago property of Flying Nickel. Perhaps you can put this property into context on a carbon neutrality perspective to the traditional lithium players we currently have out there.
We had hired a consultant called Scarn Associates. They are in the business calculating carbon consumption per unit of nickel produced, and Minago Westing production is possibly the lowest 1% in terms of the carbon consumption, because the location of the tungsten nickel belt in Manitoba, where 99% of the power come from hydro. So we're not burning carbon, we're not burning natural gas or burning coal or burning fuel to produce that power. And secondly, because Minago is an open pit operation, it lends itself nicely to electric autonomous vehicle fleet, which will further reduce carbon consumption. And third, but not least, is that the waste rocks that you dig out of the Minago before you access the nickel minerals, they are carbon absorbed. So they actually absorb carbon dioxide once they're fresh dug out of the ground. And so that will further reduce carbon emission for this Minago deposit in the tungsten nickel belt.
Yeah, and just a side note here, very interesting to see that nickel is not only used in EVs and energy storage, but also nickel-based alloys are used in carbon capture, and nickel-based catalyst is used in hydrogen. Don't ask us why or how. We're going to get an expert onto that for our next interview, but very interesting to see that there are other use cases for which nickel is needed right now, and which are also being driven by the general mega trend of decarbonization.